the Nike Alphafly 3, a shoe that we have seen for a long time. It has been on the feet of many elite athletes at many races for what seems like forever, but there's been nothing official from Nike about it, which is why I haven't talked about it, because I only really want to work from official images and information. But we did just get a official image from Nike, kind of. Nike released an image on Nike and Nike Running's Instagram, which to me isn't a product shot. It's just a cleaned up photo from Kelvin Kiptum's foot at Chicago, because it still has the red sock in it. But it's something, and it's something to talk about because I have a lot to say about this shoe. There is a bit of a gap on this channel. The Nike Alphafly is a shoe I haven't really talked about. I've talked about it in videos, but I haven't done a video about it. For the main reason is I don't generally like the Alphafly. I have both of them. I ran a lot in both of them. I ran more in the Alphafly 2 than the Alphafly 1, but I'm a Vaporfly runner. I prefer the Vaporfly. I prefer the nimbleness of the Vaporfly, any of the Vaporflies, but especially the Vaporfly 3. But it's been interesting to see the evolution of the Alphafly, and for the first time, I think I am excited about the Alphafly 3 because it seems to be a bridge between the Alphafly 1 and the Alphafly 2. What do I mean by that? Well, let's start with the Alphafly 1. This introduced a few very extreme things, and not just the AirPod. The biggest, I think, extreme introduction here was the decoupled forefoot in heel. It was quite extreme in this shoe because the forefoot area was very aggressively rockered. This shoe had a very aggressive toe ramp, and you got this gap in between the heel zone and the forefoot zone right in the midfoot, right under the carbon plate, right behind the AirPods. That was really just a void. There was no material in there. In this one, there was a little bit more material, but there still was a big gap there, which you could feel, especially if you landed midfoot. Now, the Alphafly encouraged you to get up on your toes. It had a very low drop, and I think what a lot of people liked about the original Alphafly is it was very aggressive. It really rewarded a forefoot strike or a clean forefoot strike to really load those AirPods up, really roll forward off that extreme toe rocker, and that was sort of the magic of this shoe. It was super bouncy, super rolly, and very aggressive. And then we got the Alphafly 2, which toned all of that down quite a lot. I think it made it a more well-mannered racer, but it took a lot of the fun out of the shoe, and I think it took a lot of the aggression out of the shoe, which generally I think the Alphafly 2 hasn't been as well received. I think we've seen more of them out there because it's been a wider release, but I don't think as many people have really liked this shoe. But there were a couple design changes in the Alphafly 2, which I'll talk a little bit more about later in this video, but one of the biggest is that they toned down the forefoot area. They, I think, elongated the toe rocker. They moved it back just a little bit, and they really just toned down how bouncy and aggressive the Alphafly was. They still have the decoupled forefoot and heel zone, and they introduced something in this shoe, which is a kind of a very clear forefoot zone that sort of cradles the heel and goes over the rear heel zone, which is something that we're seeing now in a lot of Nike shoes. So when we finally get to the Alphafly 3, I think this shoe really is a blend of both Alphaflys with a little Vaporfly 3 thrown in. And all of that sounds really good because what we actually have here is it looks like a much more aggressive forefoot area akin to the Alphafly, the original Alphafly. It's got the zoned heel area and the zoned forefoot area similar to what's going on in the Vaporfly 3, and the decoupled heel and forefoot area is now gone in this shoe. So that dead zone that you could get in the middle of the shoe, right under your arch, is now gone. And if you look at all these shoes side by side, and on this image, this is not scientific, this is not completely accurate because I don't think these shoes are all shot at the same angle, but what this looks like is that the air pod in the Alphafly original and the Alphafly 3 are in the same location, and you have similar toe rocker, whereas the AirPod in the Alphafly 2 is moved back just a little bit. And to my running in the Alphafly and the Alphafly 2, it definitely did feel like the Alphafly 2's AirPod was back a little bit further because it wasn't as aggressive to get up on your toes. And if I was up on my toes more, I just didn't get the propulsion from the AirPods that I did in the original Alphafly. And when I was training last year for my half marathon and a full marathon, which I raced in the Alphafly 2, I did switch to the Alphafly for a little bit just to kind of reconnect to that shoe. And I really noticed the difference. I really noticed how less propulsive and aggressive the forefoot area of the Alphafly 2 was, because it just felt like it was longer. And now looking at this image, you can really see that it does seem to be pushed back a little bit, half a centimeter or so, but enough where there is a difference. Let's go back to the Alphafly 2 and let's look at these two zones, the forefoot zone and the heel zone. Now, in this overlay that I've drawn here, I've elongated past the back of the shoe because I think that really exaggerates the line. You can really see what's going on here. So in the Alphafly 2, Nike had started this forefoot zone, which is the darker orange, which also wraps up over the heel zone, that decoupled heel zone in the Alphafly 2. And it made a shoe that cradled the heel, allowed the heel zone to flex independently from the rest of the shoe. And remember, there's a carbon plate in the shoe. Most of that darker orange heel zone, especially in the heel area, is above the plate. So that's really there for stabilization. And then it allows the forefoot zone to really move independently. Now, the problem with this is that the Alphafly 2, because it had the longer forefoot area, like I said, it would create a dead zone in the middle of the shoe. Right where there is no material, right under your midfoot, you would have a very clear dead zone. So if you ever landed flat in this shoe, I'm a forefoot striker, but I did race in this shoe, and when you get fatigued and your foot strike gets a little less crisp and you're falling back a little bit and you're landing a little flatter and you're just landing kind of just straight on the shoe, it actually feels like the shoe will just like compress or like cave in that area right under your arch, which was a horrible feeling. It was so bad that in one race, I actually stopped, went over to the side of the road, sat down, took the shoe off because I thought I broke the plate or I broke one of the AirPods, like they popped or something. But after like flexing the shoe and looking at the pods and realizing nothing was broken in the shoe, there's nothing wrong with the shoe, I realized that it was because I was running so flat, because I was really fatigued and I was like cambering in, like just collapsing in that midfoot, which was a nightmare. It felt horrible. And it's one of the many reasons I don't like the Alphafly, but it's one of the bigger ones that I don't like it. Now, these zones we saw continue in the Vaporfly 3. And I think what they did in the Vaporfly 3 was a much better execution, because now what we have here is a very clear forefoot and heel zone, and I think they work beautifully. As a forefoot striker, the Vaporfly 3 has been a breath of fresh air. It's been an outstanding upgrade from the Vaporfly 1 or 2, mostly because of these two zones. This forefoot zone functions very independently from the heel zone. It's almost like the heel zone of the shoe isn't there. And we've seen this from some other brands where they're creating these very extreme marathon racers with almost no heel anymore to really exaggerate the feel of the forefoot of the shoe. And I think Nike's done that to a certain degree in this shoe. Now, I've talked about the molding of this midsole. I have a ton of videos about that. I'll link one that gets into some of the design details and what I think the heel zone is also doing for heel strikers. I'll put a link in the description if you're interested in that. But for the sake of this conversation, Nike really took these two zones molded in the same midsole and really began to experiment with it. So that leads us into the Alphafly 3, which again, if I put this overlay on the Alphafly 3, you can see this in a very extreme way. There is a very clear forefoot zone and a very clear heel zone. And there's a lot of, looks like to me, support around the heel area, where both the forefoot and the heel zone are sort of now stabilizing the heel, which could give this shoe a very good ride. Now, if you look at the forefoot zone, It does look much more compact. It does, again, look very similar to what we saw in the Alphafly, which means this shoe should run much more aggressively, much more propulsive, especially for forefoot strikers. And for those that are midfoot strikers or maybe heel strikers that will slap their foot down, the fact that the midfoot has material in it, I think will make for a much smoother ride as well. Now, there is a bunch more that I think is really interesting about this shoe, but we don't have any official images. And again, I don't want to get into anything that isn't officially released. There's a ton of information about this shoe online because there's been a lot of leaked photos. There's been a lot of photos from races and photos from some of the tester units that have leaked out there into the marketplace. I've spent a lot of time looking at this shoe, and then the outsole, the rear profile, the medial, the lateral sides. There's a lot of other design details in this shoe, but we'll get to that stuff in January because Nike confirmed there will be a release of the Alphafly 3 in January. Now, before you get too excited, it's going to be the proto colorway. It's going to be the same thing that Nike's been doing with all the other Fly series, the Vaporfly, the Alphafly 2, all of them. We'll get a small batch in January of the proto colorway, basically what we see here, and we've seen in races recently. More importantly for me, we'll get all the press information, we'll get the specs, we'll get the drop, we'll get all of that information, which will be really key. So I can do a much deeper dive into this shoe because, again, I think there's a lot more to talk about in this shoe. And then sometime in March, April, you'll see a wider initial release of the initial colorways of this shoe. So if you're one of those people that lives in a region or a country where you do get the prototypes, look forward to January. For everyone else, you're probably going to be looking at March or April before you can get your hands on this shoe. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you like this type of content, consider subscribing because I see more content like this pop up in your feed. And if not, drop a like on this video because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.